Today, Laurie and I are going to be discussing loss, grief, trauma, and coping. Welcome to Light for Life. If you are returning to our channel, thank you. We value and appreciate you. If you are new here, you are most welcome. I am Liss. I'm a science of mind practitioner and a teacher of various healing modalities applicable to all aspects of the self and this life.
And I am Laurie. I am a holistic wellness researcher and educator. Welcome to Connections with Liss and Laurie.
Hi, Laurie.
Hi.
Our beautiful audience may not realize that you and I have actually not recorded for close to a year now. We actually had so much backlog content that we've just been uploading that. And what a blessing in disguise that turned out to be, because as we're here to inform all of our shining love lights, which I've decided to call our audience, I haven't even discussed it with you, Laurie, but what we've decided to share is an update on what we have both been through over this last year and how it involves all the topics that I mentioned in the introduction. So I'm not sure if you'd like to briefly share first what has happened for you, or if you'd like me to share what has happened for me. But essentially, our lives have always and still are mirroring each other. The details of our experiences may differ ever so slightly, but the heart of the experience itself remains the same.
Yes, it's interesting how often similarities occur between not just me and my sister, but me and my sisters from other misters. There are so many different, like you said, the details might be individual, but the theme is often very similar. And for me, the last 18 months have been interesting, challenging, um, sometimes dark, but simultaneously filled with curiosity as well. So in January of 25, my mother had a stroke, and it was quite significant. It was utterly life-changing for her. And as a result, as her only support person for me. Although I was not capable of being a nurse directly to her, she was in a facility and I was playing the role of caretaker as best I could while she was in this facility for 9 months before she eventually passed due to all of the things that she had been struggling with many years, but ultimately from the stroke and the damage that it did to her mind and to her brain. What was quite interesting for me was how strange everything was. Um, the stroke itself and the events that unfold coming from that were quite eye-opening in a way that showed me all of the things I didn't know. Errors that were made by healthcare facilities. I actually didn't even know about her incident until the next day, and I was her healthcare power of attorney. So there were a lot of feelings involved in that. There were very strong feelings involved in not being notified until a day later. Um, and just, the medical side of it itself, I knew a lot about the medical industry. I was a transcriptionist for 20 years. I am not a stranger to allopathic medicine, but it was very eye-opening. I, in no uncertain terms, made myself clear how another family could never go through being notified in such a way. And it was just really trying to stress upon the staff that steps needed to be taken to ensure that people don't fall through the cracks. People should not be falling through the cracks when we're talking about healthcare. And then the aftercare opened up more doors that I never had to navigate before. And Social Security learning curve that I was blessed to go through. But simultaneously, you're having a very personal experience with the fact that you walk into a hospital room and your mother doesn't know who you are. So it's the only thing that I can say honestly, truly, to define the last several months of my life are strange. It was just very strange and disorienting because it was so strange. So, to anyone listening that has had to navigate care of another human being, mad respect for everyone. Because there's millions of us that have to care for a loved one in some kind of capacity at some point in our lives, whether it's just supporting them to find a facility that can better care for them than we can, or in your own home. And it's simultaneously a gift, a very tough classroom, and life just keeps right on lifing.
Yeah, exactly. I think, hun, we arrive at middle age-ish. And even though we may have experienced loss and trauma and grief earlier and younger in our lives, I think middle age is really when we start almost a cascade of one after another. I've seen that with so many people in my personal life and now in mine as well. And what a difficult journey it is. No matter which way it happens or who the loved one is, it's a universal experience that manages to simultaneously be unique for us all. And that's what makes navigating it so difficult, I think. So in my case, um, it was my granny, my beloved granny. And she has been living with me and in my care for the last decade. And even though she was already 98 years old, she was in incredible health. She had the most amazing stamina. She still had all her faculties. Even though she was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, she had it extremely mildly. And then last year in September, beautiful springtime arrived. And I am very much a winter person. I love the winter. I am so much more vital and alive in the wintertime. I find the heat very draining. But at the same time, I adore spring. I've always loved that tangible, noticeable shift in the energy when spring arrives. Everything is warmer and the little green leaves are shooting and things start to flower and the birds are singing again. It's so beautiful. And 4 days into September, my granny took such an unexpected and such a sudden turn for the worse. And it was something that heretofore I had not known, which is that a change in the season can activate a much worse form of Parkinson's disease. It was the strangest and most unexpected and most astounding thing because she went from a couple of symptoms really mildly to all of them really severely overnight. And I honestly didn't know what to do. My granny has been my rock and my anchor and my pillar my whole life. And even though she was in my care, she was completely independent. She was dressing herself, feeding herself, making her own bed, watching game shows. And all of a sudden, she couldn't lift a spoon. And so for me, I'd always imagined she'd go peacefully in her sleep. I tried to psychologically prepare myself for walking into her room in the dark at 6 o'clock in the morning with a cup of coffee and her not responding to me. I spent years trying to prepare myself for that reality. That's honestly what I thought I would be facing. And out of the blue, I'm faced with my granny who's always been so capable, not being able to do anything. And I will come back to the guilt component a little bit later in this episode. But that's one of the things that I had to process a profound amount of guilt about. And I can't say I'm done with it yet, is that I feel like I should have made better decisions faster when I saw the drastic change in her. But I honestly didn't know what to do. And so instead of doing what I perhaps should have done sooner, I was at sea. Do I look for a care home for her? Do I move her into, my space so that I can be with her all the time? But at the same time, she was so resistant to not being able to do things for herself that it was a very confusing time for, a day or two. And then she seemed to rally and be all right. But then she had a dreadful accident. I'm still not sure what happened, but she slipped, she fell, and she hit her head. And that was the beginning of a really traumatic and rapid decline to the end, with 6 very, very, very difficult and traumatizing weeks in between. So it is a very different journey of loss that we had, hun, and yet so many of the components are the same. So I think to some extent I'm still in shock. To some extent I still haven't processed all the trauma, never mind all the emotions linked to it. And I don't think you even really get to the grief itself and the loss itself until you first process through all of that, which I feel like I've been doing for the last 9 months, trying to process the trauma and trying to process the guilt. And I think I'm still busy with that.
This episode is brought to you by Root Wellness. Root was born from resilience, built on love, and driven by a shared commitment to change the future of health. Developed by an award-winning scientist and inventor, Root's unique patented formulas are designed to support the body's natural abilities to remove toxic burden, support cellular repair, and promote whole body wellness. In our episodes, you may have heard us ask, what's in the way? What if it's not what you add, but what you subtract that helps you heal? This is the question worth exploring. To learn more about Root Wellness and the products on their website, visit the link below in the show notes. I think the other layer of grief is that sometimes, or oftentimes, we think it's about the person, the other person. And with each person that I personally have had to say goodbye to, it's been different. It's been a different experience every single time. Of course, because, there's different ages involved in these loved ones. There's different circumstances involved in these loved ones. So there's going to be different feelings. But in hindsight, I feel that looking back, I think we expect grief to be about that person. And I don't know about you, but for me, this time especially, the grief was about 1,000 things I never expected. Um, my mother was in her upper 80s. She had several health challenges for many years. It wasn't a huge shock that she ended up, having a stroke. It's awful. It was absolutely awful. I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but it wasn't a huge shock. And in a sense, it made it slightly easier to accept that it was official. I had to start the process of saying goodbye to my mother. And, for her sake, I wish it had not been a 9-month ordeal for her. For my sake, I was essentially holding my breath for 9 months. The same thing of walking into the room with a cup of coffee, not really sure if there was someone to offer it to or if they had slipped into the afterlife. Every phone call, I held my breath. Every time I walked into the facility, I held my breath and I didn't know it. So when she passed, and a thousand things came to the surface. It was very surprising to me that the grief wasn't just about someone's life ending. It was about so many other things that I either didn't notice before, or it wasn't time for me to notice before, or I put these things in a box, in a drawer, in a closet that I didn't want to touch. But I do know that grief has so many layers. We often talk about healing as peeling back the layers of an onion, and I can say that about grief as well. There's so many different layers, and they all have a, a, a purpose and somewhat of a gift to offer the person that is in the process of the letting go or now has to let go. Um, it was just very surprising to me how complex this particular goodbye ended up being for me. You know, maybe a lot of people who say goodbye to their mother feel the exact same way. I don't know. I've never had to do that. But I do feel that because so many of the other goodbyes were at such a young age for me, I didn't have the coping tools. I didn't have any skills. I didn't have the emotional maturity required to participate in all of the layers of the process. You know, you mentioned that there's guilt involved. Sometimes there's confusion, sometimes there's legal issues, sometimes there's just a lot of tears. It's multifaceted. And when you have a whole box of issues that you didn't address before, sometimes that box gets opened whether you wanted to or not. So for me, I guess that kind of leads into the second unfolding of the process that ended up occurring when she did pass. I mistakenly thought it would be a celebration that she was free. And while there was some of that, you know, I was grateful that she wasn't confused anymore and she wasn't lost in her own mind anymore and she wasn't suffering. So there is some freedom to that. But instead of it being an ending, for me, it was a beginning. And it was a whole new layer of strangeness. It was a whole
Mm.
new layer of um, so many things uh, that are still continuing to unfold to this day. And I think that's why I'm having a hard time finding words to explain or describe the last several months, the last year and a half, honestly, of lifing. Because, you know, my mother's experience was merely one part of the life that kept right on lifing in the last 18 months. So
Mm.
it's been a lot of life packed into 18 months.
Yeah. Well, for me, um, when my granny fell, um, because she was literally a month away from turning 99, the doctors did not expect her to recover from the knock to her head. There was bleeding on the brain, and they didn't expect that that bleed would resolve, and they felt she was too old to operate. So they didn't have much hope for my granny, but they didn't know my granny. And after 3 days, she was discharged from hospital because the bleeding on the brain had, in fact, resolved itself. She had a lot of other issues, though. But we spent 6 weeks, her and I both, fighting. She still had fight in her. And I wasn't going to give up on her as long as she was fighting. I was going to fight for her. And my experience was the absolute miracle of modern pharmacology. Because for all the different challenges she had, such as a massive abscess that developed on the side of her face, while she was hospitalized for 3 days, actually healing, when her GP was very reluctant to even prescribe me antibiotics because she's like, she's not going to respond. The abscess resolved and healed completely. She had bed sores from the hospital, and even those were responding to treatment. And then it was one thing after another for the 6 following weeks. But every time a new thing would develop, the doctor would prescribe new medicine and she would respond. That is the incredible part of what a miracle modern medicine is. But unfortunately for me, it gave me false hope that she would in fact be able to make, if not a full recovery, at least a recovery enough to perhaps live to see her 100th birthday this year in October, to perhaps be able to sit up in bed and know where she was and enjoy something on TV. I wouldn't have minded having to feed her, having to change and wash her and wait on her day and night if she had just been all right enough to actually still be able to enjoy the little things in life. And for 6 weeks, I had that hope. And for 6 weeks, I had that fight. And a part of me will eternally be grateful that she gifted me with those 6 weeks to be able to fight for her as hard as I could. But at the same time, they were 6 incredibly traumatic weeks, incredibly painful weeks for her. And because I was the one doing the hands-on caring, I had to physically make sure that she could actually swallow those meds. I had to physically turn her every 2 hours of the day and night. It was incredibly hard to be the one inflicting that pain because you're trying to care for someone. And so I'm still having nightmares, not as frequently, but I'm still having nightmares about what her and I went through together for those 6 weeks. So as grateful as I am that she gave me the chance for that, and as much as right up until the end, I was still hanging on and begging her not to go. I don't think I've really started processing the actual loss of her yet. I don't think I've started grieving for her loss yet. But one of the things that has meant so much to me in this process is something that I first learned from Carolyn Myers, which is based on Jungian psychology. And essentially the summary of it is how we actually finalize the grieving process, if there is such a thing, that basically we are finished with the process of mourning the loss of a person when we have become in ourselves everything that that person meant to us, everything that that person represented for us. So, in other words, my granny was always my anchor and my support. So when I truly become my own support in life, a lot of my grief for my granny will have resolved, and so on and so on and so on. So when you're talking about a person who meant so many things to you, that's a lot of becoming to do. So in terms of lifing, yes, we have to process the emotions and we have to process the trauma and we have to cry for the loss of that person, but then we also have to become. And it's in that becoming that grief grows us. But it's really, really hard for me to no longer be anyone's child. The loss of that role, that identifier. You know, my mom passed 17 years ago. I never knew my dad, but he passed over 20 years ago. And my granny always referred to me as her child. I grew up with her. So I'm nobody's child anymore. It's adulting full on now. And it's quite intimidating, surprisingly, to have to be completely dependent on yourself. Even though I'm blessed to have so many people who love me and support me, to realize that I have to become fully my own being, if that makes sense. There's a word for it that I'm trying to think of. Individuated. To become fully individuated, fully adulted, fully in myself. I think I'm still becoming that.
Thank you for connecting with Light for Life. Please go ahead and subscribe to the channel. If you would like to work with one of us, you can find our contact information in the About section.
Please share your insights, your questions, and your comments with us. We value your feedback. And we really hope that we will see you for our next episode.
Until we connect again, we send you love and light.